What if the city you've always called home suddenly started falling apart around you? This was the question that haunted Maya Taylor as she stood on the cracked pavement of Jacksonville's downtown streets, staring into the eerie silence where only hours before, traffic had roared and people bustled about their daily lives. The power had gone out without warning, plunging the city and many others across Florida into darkness, confusion, and fear. For weeks now, news had spread of strange failures, blackouts, floods, collapsing bridges, but no one had fully grasped the scale of what was coming. Maya, a journalist with a reputation for chasing hard truths, had felt the pressure building beneath her skin, knowing she had to tell the story no one else dared. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? She said quietly, recording a quick video on her phone before setting out into the growing chaos. The emergency alerts flooding her inbox only confirmed the worst. 10 cities in Florida were on the brink of collapse in 2025, from Jacksonville in the north to Miami in the south. Even Elon Musk had recently warned the public, tweeting about unsustainable urban growth, failing infrastructure, and climate change risks that were becoming impossible to ignore. But warnings alone did not prepare Maya for the scene unfolding before her eyes. The streets were eerily empty, broken streetlights flickered faintly, and distant sirens echoed through the night air. Businesses shuttered their doors, and families huddled in dark homes, unsure what the next hour might bring. Maya's heart pounded with a mix of dread and determination. She had lost her brother to a hurricane years ago, a loss that fueled her relentless pursuit of truth. She knew this was bigger than any story she had covered before. This was a crisis threatening the very fabric of the communities she loved. As she moved through the streets, gathering accounts from frightened neighbors and emergency responders alike, Maya felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. Could one person's voice make a difference in a moment like this? Could exposing the cracks beneath the city's surface awaken people to the urgent need for change? The night deepened, and with it came a storm more than just a physical one, a storm of uncertainty, fear, and fragile hope. But Maya was ready to face it head-on. The collapse was underway, but so was a story of resilience, of courage, and the unyielding human spirit. This was just the beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Maya Taylor's story was never just about cities collapsing or blackouts sweeping through Florida, it was about people, and most of all, about herself. Growing up in Miami, Maya was no stranger to the power of nature or the fragility of home. Her earliest memories were framed by the roar of hurricanes and the salty tang of ocean air. Her father worked for a coastal development company, a man proud of shaping the city's skyline but often blind to the risks that came with it. Her mother was a schoolteacher, a quiet woman who taught Maya about resilience, kindness, and the importance of standing up for what mattered. But the family was far from perfect. Her parents often clashed over how the city should grow, with her father pushing for progress and profits, while her mother worried about communities being displaced and the environment suffering. Those arguments lingered like shadows in Maya's childhood home, teaching her early on that sometimes, love was complicated and imperfect. The hardest lesson came when Maya was just 14. A hurricane named Maria barreled through Florida, leaving destruction in its wake. It was during that storm that Maya lost her younger brother, Lucas. He was only 8, caught in the floodwaters while trying to reach their neighbors for help. That loss shattered Maya's world and left her with an ache that never fully healed. It was this pain, buried deep inside, that drove her to become a journalist dedicated to uncovering truths others ignored. She vowed she would never let another family suffer like hers did, swallowed by disaster and silence. Over the years, Maya's pursuit of justice brought her closer to the people she loved and the city she called home, even as it fractured her relationships. Her father grew distant, caught between pride in her ambition and resentment for her criticisms of the industry he worked for. Her mother remained her anchor, a steady voice reminding her to hold on to hope even when the darkness seemed overwhelming. And then there was Jake. Jake was a firefighter, born and raised in Jacksonville, whose easy smile and unwavering courage had quietly stolen Maya's heart. Their bond was built on mutual respect and shared experiences. Both had faced loss and knew what it meant to fight against impossible odds. But even their relationship was tested by the growing crisis. Jake worked long, exhausting hours, pulled between rescuing lives and navigating the city's crumbling infrastructure. Maya watched him struggle, feeling helpless but determined to stand by his side. She knew that in the coming days, the line between hope and despair would blur, and the people she loved would be pushed to their limits. Yet, through it all, she held on to one thing, a deep belief that stories could change the course of history, that the truth could spark action. As Maya prepared to delve deeper into the unraveling disaster, she carried the weight of her past like a shield and a burden. Every broken street, every flooded neighborhood, every frightened voice was a reminder of why she couldn't turn away. This wasn't just news, it was a chance to prevent another tragedy, to fight for a future where cities didn't just survive, but thrived. And in that fight, Maya knew she would have to confront not only the external forces threatening Florida's cities but also the scars within herself. The storm had passed, but the true crisis was only beginning. Maya Taylor watched as the first cracks began to show beneath the surface of Florida's supposedly vibrant cities. Reports of infrastructure failures started trickling in from Tampa and Orlando, cities once celebrated for their booming tourism and rapid growth. Bridges that had stood for decades suddenly showed signs of weakness. Floodgates, designed to protect communities from rising waters, malfunctioned without warning. Emergency services were stretched thin, and the public's trust in their leaders began to erode. Maya's investigation uncovered troubling patterns. Whispers of ignored warnings from engineers and environmental experts surfaced. It seemed that city officials, driven by political ambition and economic pressures, had turned a blind eye to critical maintenance and risk assessments. The consequences were becoming impossible to ignore. Maya spent long nights piecing together data and eyewitness accounts, speaking with first responders like Jake, who was on the front lines of a city struggling to stay afloat. Jake's exhaustion was palpable. Calls flooded in constantly for water rescues, fires sparked by electrical shorts, and desperate pleas from families trapped in flooded neighborhoods. Maya's frustration grew as she realized how fragile the system had become, how close the cities were to tipping over the edge. One evening, Maya received a tip that a small dam near Tampa's outskirts had begun to leak. It was the first real sign of failure she could investigate in person. She traveled there immediately, joining local residents who were nervously watching the water level rise. The dam structure, once a symbol of safety, now looked dangerously unstable. As night fell, a loud crack echoed across the water, and a portion of the dam gave way, releasing a surge of water into the nearby suburbs. Panic erupted. Families scrambled to evacuate, but roads were quickly flooding, making escape difficult. Maya documented the chaos, her heart racing as she filmed families carrying children through knee-deep water. She felt a familiar knot of helplessness tighten inside her, the same knot she had felt all those years ago during Hurricane Maria. But this time, she refused to turn away. Just as the disaster seemed overwhelming, a glimmer of hope emerged. Neighbors banded together, forming human chains to help the elderly and children. Volunteers arrived with boats and supplies, determined to protect their community. Maya captured these moments, knowing they showed the resilience and spirit that could withstand even the darkest hours. Yet, the relief was short-lived. The day after the flood, city officials held a press conference, but instead of taking responsibility, they deflected blame onto activists and the media. They accused people like Maya of spreading panic and undermining public confidence. The tension in the city escalated. Protests broke out as citizens demanded transparency and action. Maya found herself in the eye of a storm not just of water, but of political and social discord. Jake called her one night, his voice heavy with exhaustion and worry. "Maya, it's getting worse. The next dam, the levees, they're all showing signs of failure. The city's emergency plan is falling apart. We're fighting fires and floods at the same time. She could hear the strain in his voice and knew that the people she cared about were facing challenges beyond anything they had prepared for. Maya's own relationship with the city's leadership grew more strained as she pushed harder for answers. She uncovered emails and memos revealing that warnings had been ignored for years. Developers had prioritized new construction over repairs. Environmental reports warning about rising sea levels and soil erosion had been buried in filing cabinets. The more Maya dug, the clearer it became that this crisis was not a natural disaster but a man-made one, born of greed, neglect, and denial. Despite the mounting obstacles, Maya clung to the moments of hope she witnessed daily. She told herself that the community's spirit, the courage of first responders like Jake, and the growing awareness among citizens could still turn the tide. The chapter of rising conflict was far from over. As tensions escalated between those demanding accountability and those desperate to maintain the status quo, Maya realized that the story she was telling was bigger than any headline. It was about the fight for survival, the struggle to reclaim a future, and the courage to face hard truths. The cracks beneath the surface were widening, but so was the determination to mend what was broken. The battle lines were drawn, and Maya stood ready to confront whatever came next. Maya Taylor had faced stories before, but nothing prepared her for the journey ahead as she headed south to Miami, the city where her roots ran deepest and where the crisis was already a living nightmare. The streets she once knew so well were nearly unrecognizable, pavements cracked and buckled from relentless flooding, seawater creeping into buildings like an unstoppable tide, and the hum of desperation hanging heavy in the humid air. Miami was the epicenter of Florida's unfolding collapse, and for Maya, it was a confrontation with both the city she loved and the ghosts of her past. As she drove through neighborhoods once bustling with life, now eerily deserted, Maya saw families hastily packing up what little they could save, their faces etched with exhaustion and fear. Homelessness was rising, shelters were overwhelmed, and the local government's emergency response was stretched to its limits. The skyline, once a glittering testament to ambition and progress, stood in stark contrast to the waterlogged streets and flooded highways. She met with Carlos Rivera, an environmental scientist and longtime advocate for climate action. Carlos showed Maya the latest data: rising sea levels, worsening soil subsidence, and failing drainage systems all combined into a perfect storm threatening to swallow the city whole. "We've been warning them for years," Carlos said, his voice tinged with frustration and sadness. But development continued unchecked. "Miami's foundations are literally sinking beneath us." Maya listened, absorbing every detail, every warning, feeling the familiar ache of loss stirring inside her. This wasn't just a story about buildings and infrastructure, it was about people's lives unraveling, about homes lost and futures stolen by negligence and denial. As she walked through the flooded streets, memories flooded back: her brother Lucas, the hurricane that took him away, the promises broken by those who said the city was safe. The pain was sharp, but it fueled her resolve. Maya interviewed displaced families, local business owners struggling to keep their livelihoods alive, and volunteers working tirelessly to distribute aid. Each conversation painted a vivid picture of resilience amid devastation. She documented the flickering hope amid despair, the children playing in puddles despite the chaos, neighbors sharing food, strangers offering shelter. Yet, the emotional toll was unmistakable. Tears welled in Maya's eyes as an elderly woman shared how she had lost her entire home but refused to leave, clinging to memories and a lifetime of roots. That evening, Maya attended a community meeting where officials tried to reassure citizens with promises of new infrastructure plans and federal aid. But skepticism was thick in the air. The crowd's anger and fear were palpable, and many accused the leaders of ignoring warnings and putting profits before people. Maya felt the weight of responsibility heavier than ever. She was no longer just an observer, she was part of this community's fight. The next day, she accompanied Carlos and a team of scientists to a critical site on the city's coast, where seawalls were crumbling and the ocean was inching closer to swallowing whole neighborhoods. The smell of saltwater and decay filled the air, mixed with the sharp tang of diesel from emergency generators. Every step through the soggy terrain was a reminder of how precarious their situation had become. Carlos explained the complex interplay between climate change, urban sprawl, and failed infrastructure. Miami's geography works against it, he said. The water has nowhere to go, and the city's growth has blocked natural drainage paths. If we don't act now, large parts of the city will be underwater within a decade. Maya took notes furiously, feeling the enormity of the challenge ahead. She realized that this was not just Miami's problem, it was a warning to cities everywhere about the consequences of ignoring nature's limits. Returning to her hotel that night, Maya's phone buzzed with messages from Jake in Jacksonville. The situation there was worsening too, floodwaters were rising again, and the city's emergency shelters were near capacity. He urged her to be careful, reminding her that no city was safe as the crisis spread. Maya's thoughts drifted back to their last conversation, his voice tired but steady. They both knew that the coming weeks would test them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. As she prepared her report for the next day, Maya grappled with a storm inside herself. The city's decay mirrored her own internal battle, grief, anger, hope, and determination all swirling together. She wrote about the science, the people, the failures, and the courage she witnessed. But most of all, she wrote about the urgent need for change before it was too late. In Miami, every broken street and every displaced family was a chapter in a story that had been ignored for far too long. Maya vowed she would not let this story fade into the background. She would carry it forward, shining a light on the collapse, demanding accountability, and amplifying the voices of those fighting to save their homes. This journey into the heart of Florida's crisis was more than a story. It was a call to action, a reckoning with the past, and a fight for the future. The city's fate was uncertain, but Maya's resolve was clear. She would face the coming storms, both external and within, with every ounce of strength she had. The collapse was no longer a distant threat, it was here, in the streets she walked, in the people she met, and in the decisions yet to be made. And Maya Taylor was ready to stand in the middle of it all. The air in Tallahassee was thick with tension. The state's capital had become the nerve center for the emergency response, but Maya Taylor quickly saw through the polished statements and choreographed press conferences. Politicians smiled for the cameras, promising aid, resilience, recovery, but the truth was far messier. Cities were failing, and behind closed doors, leaders were scrambling to protect reputations instead of lives. Maya sat in the back of a legislative chamber one morning, watching as lawmakers debated budget reallocations for climate adaptation. What struck her wasn't the passion or urgency, it was the staggering detachment. They talked in numbers and theories, not about the families sleeping in their cars, or the firemen risking their lives with little more than duct tape and prayer holding infrastructure together. Her phone vibrated. It was a message from a whistleblower, someone who had been feeding her information in fragments, leaked reports, ignored emails, internal memos. The message simply said, "You need to see this." Maya met the source that afternoon in a parking garage just outside the city. The man, nervous, sweating, barely able to meet her eyes, handed her a flash drive. This goes all the way back to 2018. They knew about the dams, the coastal zoning violations. All of it. They covered it up. He walked away before she could even ask his name. Back in her car, Maya plugged the drive into her laptop and watched in stunned silence. Hundreds of documents, some marked confidential, laid out a damning timeline. State and city officials had received repeated warnings from engineers and scientists. Studies predicted catastrophic infrastructure failures if preventive measures weren't taken. Yet funding had been diverted, projects delayed, and permits approved for risky developments in high-flood zones. Developers donated to campaigns. Regulations were quietly rolled back. And amidst it all, the safety of millions had been compromised for short-term gain. Then she saw it, a name she hadn't expected. Her father. Listed as one of the advisors who pushed forward a coastal high-rise project in Miami despite the engineering team's objections. A memo from that time showed he had insisted the risks were exaggerated and the benefits too valuable to ignore. Maya sat still, her breath caught in her throat. She felt like the ground beneath her had cracked. All these years she had believed her father was merely complicit through silence or blind faith in the system. But here it was in writing, his signature below a recommendation that ignored flood models in favor of accelerated construction. That project had broken ground the year before Hurricane Maria. Her brother Lucas had drowned during that storm. Maya's chest tightened. She couldn't think. Couldn't speak. The grief that had shaped her life now fused with betrayal. The narrative she had built around her father's legacy, flawed but unknowing, crumbled in an instant. That night, Maya didn't sleep. She stared at her laptop, reading memo after memo, watching the same story unfold across different cities, West Palm Beach, Sarasota, Fort Lauderdale. Every name on that list represented a place that now teetered on the edge, and each was haunted by the fingerprints of those who had chosen profit over protection. She thought of Jake and how he had once told her that the scariest part of his job wasn't the flames or the floods, it was knowing that someone, somewhere, had chosen to let it happen. The fire's not the enemy, he'd said. It's the decisions that set the fire in motion. The next morning, Maya confronted her father. She called him from a hotel room, her voice trembling but determined. He answered on the second ring. "Maya," he said, sounding surprised. "I've been meaning to call. I saw your reports. I'm proud of you." She didn't respond right away. Then she said, quietly, "Did you know about the flood risk reports for the Shorefront Tower project?" There was a pause. A long one. Then, carefully, "Maya, those studies were inconclusive. At the time, we didn't have the data we have now." "Don't lie to me," she said. "I have the memos. I have your signature on a statement that said the risks were manageable. The building broke ground months before Maria. Lucas, he died in that storm, Dad. And you told them to go ahead anyway." Silence. A different kind of silence now. He finally said, "I was doing what everyone else was doing. Trying to grow the city, bring in jobs. We didn't think it would be like this." Maya swallowed her rage, her grief, her desire to scream. "That's the point. You didn't think. You didn't listen. And now entire cities are collapsing." She hung up before he could say anything more. The call left her hollow, but also clear. This wasn't just about blame anymore. It was about what came next. She took the documents and crafted her biggest exposé yet, naming names, laying out the timeline, and connecting dots the public had never seen. She titled it "The Paper Trail to Collapse" and sent it to every major outlet in the country. The article went viral within hours. People were shocked, outraged, heartbroken. Maya received hundreds of messages, some of support, others of anger and denial. Politicians deflected. Developers issued vague statements. But the momentum had shifted. The public wasn't just watching anymore, they were acting. Protests swelled. Investigations were opened. And for the first time, those in power couldn't look away. But amid the chaos, Maya felt a different storm brewing inside her. The emotional climax of her journey wasn't just revealing the truth to the world, it was facing the truth about her own past. Her father's decisions. Her brother's death. Her own inability to let go of the illusion that the people she loved could never do something so wrong. That night, she walked along the flooded edge of Biscayne Bay, the water licking at the shore like a quiet warning. She thought about her mother, about Lucas, about Jake. She thought about how love and betrayal could coexist, how sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who cause the deepest wounds. And yet, she didn't feel broken. She felt fierce. The revelation hadn't destroyed her, it had forged her into something stronger. Maya Taylor wasn't just a journalist chasing a story. She was a witness, a voice, and now, a force. The collapse was real. The damage was vast. But the truth had been set free, and she would not stop now. Maya stood beneath the bleached sky of Cape Coral, the air heavy with brine and smoke, the faint scent of burned wood and saltwater clinging to her clothes. The city had been hit hard, flooded neighborhoods stretched for miles, homes abandoned with waterlines etched into their walls like grim reminders of what had been lost. This place was one of the last on her list, one of the final chapters in the long, harrowing journey that had taken her across a broken Florida, from the crumbling streets of Jacksonville to the sinking coastline of Miami, and now to the scorched remains of a place once named one of America's fastest-growing cities. But now, the growth had turned into grief. This wasn't the dramatic chaos of sudden collapse, it was the slow erosion of normal life. Gas stations emptied, schools closed indefinitely, and the few businesses that remained open were running on borrowed time and diesel generators. Maya wandered past a shuttered pharmacy where handwritten signs taped to the door begged for insulin, antibiotics, anything. Across the street, a mother cradled her child while charging her phone from a community generator powered by volunteers. Cape Coral, like so many other Florida cities, was collapsing, not in a single dramatic moment, but inch by inch, system by system, soul by soul. Maya had spent months documenting the unraveling. Her exposés had set off national shockwaves, her name now linked to a growing movement of truth-tellers, whistleblowers, and citizens demanding more from their leaders. But in that moment, standing in the thick silence of a ruined city, it wasn't the headlines she thought about. It was her brother Lucas, the storm that had taken him, and the father whose decisions had unknowingly contributed to it. It was her mother, who had passed quietly just weeks before the blackout began, never knowing how much Maya's reporting would eventually matter. And it was Jake, who had nearly died in a flood rescue near Tampa, dragged under a submerged overpass while trying to pull an elderly man from a stalled truck. He'd survived, barely, and now wore the scars of that day on his hands and shoulders. Jake was resting now, recovering in Jacksonville, their late-night calls filled with silence, tired laughter, and the strange comfort of knowing someone else had seen the worst of it and still believed in something better. Maya had believed, too, even when it was hardest, when she faced protesters screaming at her car for destroying their towns, with her journalism, when powerful figures threatened lawsuits, when she realized the truth about her father and had to live with the aching contradiction of loving someone who had helped create the very nightmare she was trying to expose. But what she had seen across Florida wasn't just devastation, it was courage. She had watched strangers risk their lives to protect neighbors, scientists work tirelessly without pay to monitor environmental data, teachers hold classes in flood-damaged libraries, firefighters carry stretchers through waist-deep water, and teenagers organize food drives using social media and skateboards. She had seen the human spirit bend and strain but never snap. In Cape Coral, she found a quiet spot near the edge of a collapsed canal and pulled out her notebook. She began to write, not a report, not an exposé, but something closer to a letter. She wrote about the woman who lost her husband in a levee collapse but still baked bread for her entire block every morning. She wrote about the retired engineer who gave away sandbags until his garage was empty, then taught kids how to build their own from old jeans. She wrote about the boy in Orlando who used a drone to deliver medication to people stranded by water. She wrote about loss and love, guilt and healing, the small acts of defiance against despair. And then, she wrote a single sentence that stopped her hand: life is full of surprises, but love will always lead the way. She stared at it, unsure if it was too simple, too sentimental, too clean for the mess she had witnessed. But it felt true. Not because love fixed things, it didn't. Love hadn't stopped the floods or rebuilt the bridges or drained the saltwater from ruined homes. But love had kept people moving forward. It had stitched families back together, pulled strangers into the same rowboat, held vigil in shelters, rebuilt one house at a time. It had pulled Maya from her grief and anger and shaped it into purpose. The wind stirred, lifting pages from her notebook, and she caught them before they flew into the water. She laughed softly to herself, the sound brittle but real. Around her, the city remained still, a jagged landscape of resilience and ruin. But there was a new undercurrent now, something shifting. Maya had been invited to Washington to speak before a national task force on climate adaptation and infrastructure reform. Her reports had caught the attention of senators, mayors, and even Elon Musk, whose controversial tweets had helped launch the public discourse into overdrive. In a recent post, Musk had written, "We ignored the data for decades. Now we must build smarter, faster, cleaner, or nature will make the decisions for us." It had been retweeted millions of times, and while Maya didn't always agree with Musk's methods, she respected that he was using his influence to push for change. The truth had become undeniable. Cities were failing. Systems were failing. And only a complete reimagining of urban life could save what remained. But as she sat there by the broken canal, Maya didn't think about politics or policy. She thought about the small things that built real recovery: honesty, accountability, compassion. She thought about telling stories that didn't just inform but inspired. She thought about using her platform not just to expose what was broken, but to highlight what could be rebuilt. Maya returned to Jacksonville days later, greeted by familiar streets still scarred by water damage, but dotted with signs of progress: crews laying new drainage systems, community gardens blooming from empty lots, murals painted on boarded windows, each one a tribute to those lost and a promise to those still here. Jake met her at the station, limping slightly, his smile crooked but steady. They didn't say much. They didn't need to. They walked side by side down the street where they'd first met, past the fire station now operating on solar backup, past the school that had reopened as both a shelter and a community hub. Jacksonville, like every city Maya had visited, was still struggling. But it was also learning. Growing. Changing. And so was she. The journey had broken something open inside her. Not just the pain of loss or the anger at corruption, but the understanding that the story was never really about cities collapsing. It was about what we choose to do when the ground gives way, when the lights go out, when the systems we trusted fail. It was about what we carry, and who we become. And in the ruins of Florida, Maya Taylor found not just a story, but a future worth fighting for. Jacksonville had always carried itself with quiet confidence, a sprawling city of rivers, bridges, and booming suburbs that had for decades escaped the spotlight. Unlike Miami or Tampa, Jacksonville didn't crave attention. It expanded steadily, methodically, swallowing up forests and marshland and converting them into residential tracts and office parks. But Maya Taylor had seen the cracks before most. The first signs were subtle: sinkholes forming near construction sites, emergency vehicles delayed by traffic bottlenecks caused by poorly maintained bridges, a string of power outages blamed on aging transformers that no one had budgeted to replace. But then came the flood. What was supposed to be a mild tropical storm swelled into a 3-day siege of wind and water that tested the city's limits. The St. Johns River, swollen from weeks of upstream rain, overflowed and engulfed neighborhoods that had never flooded before. Maya had watched it unfold from her apartment, helpless, knowing Jake was out there in the chaos, coordinating rescue efforts with exhausted crews and dwindling resources. It had taken nearly 4 days for the waters to recede, and when they did, they left behind a city on its knees. Roads buckled, entire subdivisions were declared uninhabitable, and thousands of residents, many from lower-income communities along the river, were left homeless. Maya walked those streets in the days that followed, camera in hand, capturing images that would later run on national news. But it wasn't just the physical damage that struck her. It was the betrayal. City officials had been warned. Reports dating back 5 years had outlined the risk of extreme flooding exacerbated by unchecked development in floodplains. Internal emails leaked by a former city planner showed that recommendations to expand drainage infrastructure had been repeatedly delayed in favor of fast-tracking new housing projects and tax-incentivized commercial zones. The anger in Jacksonville was different. It wasn't just fear or grief, it was fury. Community meetings turned into shouting matches. Residents demanded resignations. A group of high school students organized a protest that shut down the main city hall entrance for 2 days, waving signs that read, "We drown, they profit," and "Where's the plan, Mayor?" Maya had attended those protests, not just as a reporter but as a participant. She had spent too long standing on the edge of these stories. Now, they were her own. Jake returned to duty just 10 days after the flood, despite doctors warning him he needed more recovery time. But he couldn't sit still. "If we don't fight for this place, who will?" he had said, tightening the brace on his shoulder and heading back to the firehouse. His voice shook when he talked about the families they couldn't reach in time, the grandmother he'd tried to resuscitate in a boat drifting toward an overpass, the little girl who'd clung to a fireman's jacket like it was the last safe thing on earth. Maya had never seen him cry before. That night, they sat in silence on their apartment's rooftop, looking out over a city still flickering with intermittent blackouts. "It's like we're waking up from a dream," Jake said finally. "And realizing the house was on fire the whole time." Maya nodded, the words ringing true. Jacksonville had believed in its own invincibility, but nature and neglect had shattered that illusion. And yet, even in the aftermath, something was growing. The city had begun to listen. Not all at once, and not without resistance, but something had shifted. Engineers who had once been ignored were now being brought into emergency meetings. The city council launched a transparency portal showing the state of critical infrastructure. Local colleges organized climate resilience workshops. And citizens, especially the youth, were showing up in numbers Maya had never seen before. The rebuilding wouldn't be fast, and it wouldn't undo the harm already done, but it was a start. Maya spent weeks compiling her report on Jacksonville, and it became one of her most widely read articles. Titled, "When the Water Rose, the Day Jacksonville Couldn't Deny the Truth," it combined harrowing photos with first-hand accounts and policy analysis. It didn't just tell readers what had happened, it made them feel the urgency, the pain, the resolve. Elon Musk even shared the piece, calling it essential reading for every urban planner and mayor in America. Maya didn't care about the attention. She cared about the families in Springfield who were still boiling their water weeks after the flood. About the high school that converted its gym into a long-term shelter. About the firefighter who lost his leg in a collapsed bridge rescue but continued mentoring cadets from his hospital bed. She cared about Jake, who now spoke at city safety briefings and who had begun talking about running for local office, not out of ambition, but out of frustration with the people in power who had failed them. "It's not just about fixing pipes and pumps," Jake told her. "It's about leadership. The kind that shows up before the flood, not after." Maya saw in Jacksonville both the danger of denial and the possibility of change. It was a city that had been forced to look in the mirror, to confront its flaws, its blind spots, its complicity in its own collapse. And in that confrontation, something human and hopeful had taken root. In her final days in the city before heading to her next destination, Maya visited a rebuilt daycare center near the riverfront. The children were painting on cardboard, bright suns, stick-figure families, rainbows arcing over blue houses. The teacher told her that after the flood, they let the kids express their feelings through art, and most of them had started drawing water and boats. Now, weeks later, the water was receding from their drawings too. Maya smiled and asked one little boy what he was painting. He held up his picture, a firefighter on a boat, reaching out to a woman and a small child. "That's the man who saved my mama," he said proudly. Maya felt her eyes sting. She stepped outside into the Jacksonville sun, which was finally shining, and stood still for a moment. The city still bore its wounds, scars etched into pavement and memory, but it was standing. And in the quiet between sirens, beneath the buzz of solar-powered traffic lights and the hammering of rebuilding crews, she could feel it breathing again. Jacksonville was not done fighting. Neither was she. Tampa had long considered itself lucky. Nestled against the Gulf Coast with a blend of old Florida charm and new money development, it had been spared the full wrath of a major hurricane for over a century. That kind of fortune creates a false sense of permanence, a belief that the city is protected by fate or geography or both. But in 2025, Tampa's luck ran out, and it didn't take a named storm to do it. It started with the tides. King tide events became monthly threats, not rare occurrences. Neighborhoods like Shore Acres and Ballast Point began flooding without a drop of rain. Just the push of the moon and the rising seas. Residents were forced to adjust, keeping sandbags stacked by front doors, installing sump pumps in living rooms, and memorizing alternate routes that might stay dry another year or two. But the illusion that Tampa was simply adjusting, adapting, hanging in there, that illusion shattered when the Alafia River breached its banks in mid-July. A freak confluence of summer rains, soil saturation, and an infrastructure failure at a nearby reservoir created a surge that moved fast and without warning. Streets became rivers. Cell service dropped. And the evacuation orders came too late. Maya arrived the day after, flying in on a relief chopper operated by a volunteer pilot who'd been sleeping on a cot between missions. From the air, the damage was surreal. Boats lodged in trees, rooftops barely visible above brown water, and entire sections of South Tampa cut off entirely. There were no headlines screaming, "Hurricane Tampa," but it didn't matter. The disaster didn't need a name. The destruction was real, and the consequences would ripple for generations. The first thing Maya noticed when she landed was the smell: mold, fuel, wet drywall, and desperation. She made her way to a temporary shelter set up in a sports arena, where families huddled under Red Cross blankets and teenagers took shifts watching charging stations like sacred shrines. Volunteers passed out food and water with practiced urgency. Maya interviewed them quietly, moving from cot to cot, recording voices that trembled with disbelief and anger. A single mother named Darlene told Maya how she tried to leave but couldn't find gas. The lines were 3 hours long and then the stations went dry. "I couldn't leave my mama behind. She's on oxygen. So we stayed. And the water came in through the floor." Her son clung to her side, silent, eyes wide. In another corner, a retired city engineer showed Maya his makeshift flood maps. He'd predicted this breach, down to the week. "I sent the data," he whispered. "I emailed the city council, the mayor's office, the planning department. No one wanted to hear it. Too many condos to approve. Too many donors to keep happy." Maya knew that pattern well by now. She followed it like a blueprint: warnings ignored, infrastructure stretched, money prioritized over safety. But something about Tampa felt different. There was an added edge here, a sense that the city's leadership had gambled too big and lost in spectacular fashion. Developers had built luxury high-rises over marshland, promising investors views and returns while quietly ignoring flood zone maps. And when those properties were evacuated, it wasn't just the locals who were angry, it was the out-of-state buyers, the foreign stakeholders, the people who had bet on permanence in a place running out of stable ground. Maya stood at the edge of Bayshore Boulevard, the iconic waterfront drive now littered with debris and silt. She watched a couple pull a sofa down the street on a makeshift raft, waving to neighbors as if the absurdity were normal now. Maybe it was. In Tampa, as in so many other Florida cities, absurdity had become the daily currency of survival. But amid the wreckage, she also found something stirring. In the Seminole Heights district, she met a group of restaurant owners who had turned their kitchens into community food hubs. They cooked on gas stoves powered by trucked and propane, feeding hundreds a day. They served beans and rice, soup, sandwiches. They had no menu, no prices, just a sign that read, "If you're hungry, eat. If you can give, give." Maya helped pass out plates for hours, losing herself in the rhythm of motion, finding peace in the act of doing instead of documenting. That night, she sat with one of the chefs, a tattooed man named Luis who used to run a tapas bar downtown. "We lost the restaurant," he said, not with bitterness, but fact. "Insurance won't pay out. Flood exclusion. But we're still here. Feeding people. So I guess that's what we are now. Not a business. Just a kitchen that shows up." Maya asked him why he stayed. Why not leave, move inland, start over somewhere safer? Luis looked at her for a long time before answering. Because it's home. Because I remember when this place was alive. And because if we all leave, who's left to fix it? That line echoed in her head as she returned to her hotel, a converted school gymnasium on high ground, now functioning as both media headquarters and temporary housing for journalists and aid workers. Maya's notes were filling fast. Her report on Tampa would become a centerpiece in her series, not just for its tragedy but for the complex web of failures that led to it. She traced the funding paths from state bonds to local projects that never materialized, interviewed whistleblowers who had seen levee inspections falsified, and even uncovered a back-channel email from a city commissioner warning that approving further development near the Alafia was an open invitation to litigation once the river pops. And it popped. With vengeance. Tampa's unraveling made national news, not because it was unexpected, but because it was inevitable. Elon Musk posted a clip from Maya's interview with the engineer, adding the caption, "This is what it looks like when warnings are ignored. Build with nature or be destroyed by it." It went viral. Politicians scrambled. FEMA declared a federal disaster zone. Grants were announced. Rebuilding would come, but slowly, unevenly, and not for everyone. Maya ended her report with a quote from Darlene, "We didn't need a hurricane. Just a system that didn't care enough to protect us." She let those words stand alone at the bottom of the article. No commentary. No summary. Just the truth, laid bare. She filed the piece and went for a walk along a stretch of beach littered with broken furniture, doll heads, palm branches, and shattered glass. The water was calm again, almost mocking. The sky pink with sunset. It looked beautiful, like nothing had ever happened. But she knew better. Beneath that stillness was a tide that never stopped rising. And in the bones of this city, in the soaked concrete and crumbled seawalls, the consequences of denial were etched forever. Maya turned back toward the city, ready to move forward, already thinking about the next place, the next collapse, the next story that needed telling. Because Tampa was just one chapter, and the book was still being written. Fort Lauderdale had always sold the fantasy of paradise. White sand beaches, glittering high-rises, luxury yachts sliding through a polished network of canals like jewels on velvet. Tourists came for spring break, retirees came to settle, investors came to build. But beneath the manicured lawns and palm-lined boulevards, Fort Lauderdale was quietly sinking, quite literally, and it wasn't just the sea that was rising, it was the evidence, the warnings, the costs. And no one wanted to look. Not until the city woke one morning in late September to find its downtown underwater without a single drop of rain having fallen the night before. Maya arrived less than 24 hours later. She had flown out of Tampa on a private humanitarian flight, one of the last operating air corridors before South Florida's regional grid failed entirely. The city she landed in was far from the vacation brochures and glossy real estate websites that had defined its brand for decades. The runways were damp. The terminal dark. Fort Lauderdale had been brought to its knees not by a hurricane, but by the invisible, inescapable pressure of groundwater and tide, a phenomenon the city's own engineers had warned about for years in quiet meetings and suppressed reports. As Maya moved through the flooded streets, the surreal nature of the disaster struck her. Waves sloshed through alleys between office towers. Fish swam lazily in parking garages. Luxury cars floated sideways. The water, a strange blue-green sheen, reflected palm trees that now resembled skeletons against the hazy skyline. But it was the silence that haunted her most, no horns, no sirens, no buzz of beach bars or jet skis. Just a slow, wet quiet. She joined a group of volunteers navigating through the Las Olas Isles in kayaks, delivering food and supplies to elderly residents trapped in their condos. They called it sunny day flooding, but this was something else entirely. Elevators were out. Fresh water systems had failed. Streets were now contaminated canals. The city's stormwater pumps had stopped working, overwhelmed, underfunded, and in some cases, corroded from salt exposure because maintenance had been delayed year after year. Maya interviewed a former city commissioner who had resigned 2 years earlier after failing to push through a resiliency bond that would have allocated millions toward infrastructure upgrades. "They called me alarmist," he told her, his voice bitter. Said the numbers were exaggerated. Developers didn't want the scrutiny. Realtors didn't want the headlines. So they killed the funding. And now look at us. The mayor's office issued a carefully worded statement calling the event unprecedented and vowing to pursue aggressive new adaptation strategies, but Maya had seen enough to know what that meant: more studies, more delays, more talk. Meanwhile, the water continued its quiet invasion. Schools were closed indefinitely. Businesses shuttered. Insurance companies were beginning to withdraw coverage altogether. Residents who could afford to were already leaving. But for most, there was nowhere to go. Maya met a high school science teacher named Carla who had turned her front porch into a classroom. Wearing rain boots and a windbreaker, she taught environmental science to a group of soaked teens every afternoon. "We don't need a textbook," she said, gesturing at the water rising up her driveway. "This is the lab. This is the lesson." Maya smiled, admiring the resilience but feeling the weight of futility. In Fort Lauderdale, the fight wasn't about rebuilding, it was about accepting the irreversible. Large sections of the city were now considered repeat loss zones, meaning the federal government had paid to repair them more than 5 times in a decade. The latest data showed that if sea levels continued at their current rate, over half the city's real estate would be permanently inundated within 20 years. But for some neighborhoods, that timeline had already arrived. She visited Riverland, where an entire street had collapsed into a submerged sinkhole, taking 3 homes with it. Emergency crews had cordoned off the area, but residents lingered nearby, watching as excavators tried in vain to recover personal belongings from the wreckage. An elderly woman named Joyce sobbed quietly as she pointed to what had once been her house. "It was built in 1972. We never had a flood until 5 years ago. And now, it's gone. Everything's gone." Maya listened, recording, nodding, her heart heavy. The stories in Fort Lauderdale didn't come with dramatic headlines. They came in drips: a staircase rusted through, a mold outbreak in a hospital wing, a road that cracked open in the middle of a sunny afternoon. It was the banality of collapse that chilled her. No alarms, no countdown. Just slow, inevitable decay. And yet, amid the wreckage, people still hoped. She met a group of young engineers from the local college, all recent graduates who had refused out-of-state jobs to stay and work on flood mitigation projects. They met in basements and rooftops, building models, running simulations, testing new types of porous concrete and floating infrastructure. "We know we can't save the whole city," one of them said. "But we might save part of it. Or maybe we're just laying the groundwork for what comes next, for the cities that still have time." Elon Musk had recently posted a cryptic tweet: "Cities must evolve or dissolve," and while many mocked it as tech bro fatalism, Maya had seen the truth in it. Fort Lauderdale wasn't dying in fire or chaos. It was dissolving. Drifting away from what it once was, molecule by molecule, dream by dream. Maya filed her story from a borrowed desk inside a second-floor art gallery that had been converted into a media center. Her piece, "The City That Sank in Silence," was part exposé, part obituary. She laid out the financial trail: how flood zone reclassifications had been delayed to protect property values, how stormwater upgrades were promised and then quietly removed from budgets, how tourism dollars were prioritized over public safety. But she also focused on the human side. The teachers, the kids, the volunteers paddling door to door, the people still fighting because they didn't know how not to. The article went viral within hours. Musk reposted it with the caption, "Adaptation starts with honesty. Are your city leaders lying to you?" The response was swift. Lawsuits were filed. Insurance investigations launched. Property values plummeted overnight in the hardest hit zones. Some hailed Maya as a hero. Others called her a fearmonger. But she didn't care about the headlines anymore. She cared about Joyce, about Carla, about the teen engineers soldering circuits in a flood-prone lab. She cared about the truth. And the truth was that Fort Lauderdale was collapsing, not all at once, but piece by piece, with every tide, every storm, every ignored report. And yet, as she stood one evening on the edge of the Intracoastal, watching the lights of empty condos shimmer on the water's surface like ghosts, she felt a strange peace. Because people were beginning to listen. And sometimes, listening was the first step toward change. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? St. Petersburg had always felt like a postcard frozen in time, vintage charm wrapped in salt air and sunshine, its historic bungalows and cobbled streets nestled between the Gulf of Mexico and Tampa Bay. Artists filled the downtown alleys with murals, retirees played shuffleboard near Mirror Lake, and tourists strolled the waterfront with ice cream cones in hand. But in 2025, St. Pete was no longer just Florida's Sunshine City. It had become the eye of an unfolding environmental reckoning, teetering on the edge of disaster with every rising tide, every buckled street, every whispered warning ignored. Maya Taylor stepped off the ferry from Tampa with a heaviness in her chest. She had visited St. Pete in better times. She remembered covering an art festival here years ago, full of color and hope. Now the murals were peeling, streets were warped, and the locals wore the quiet exhaustion of people trying to pretend things were fine when they clearly weren't. The first thing she noticed was the smell. Not of the ocean, not fresh salt air, but the heavy stink of backed-up sewage, a sign that the city's ancient plumbing was once again overwhelmed. In neighborhoods like Old Northeast and Shore Acres, residents had learned to live with periodic flooding, but this was different. This time, it wasn't just water seeping in from the sea, it was the entire system failing beneath their feet. Pumps installed after the storms of 2021 had burned out under the strain of near-constant operation. One engineer told Maya it was like trying to bail out a sinking boat with a paper cup. She followed a utility crew through the Grand Central District as they waded knee-deep in a flooded alley, trying to patch a pipe that had burst under the pressure. "We warned them," said the foreman, shaking his head. "We said we needed a full overhaul. But they gave us money for paint and sidewalks instead." That same day, Maya met Denise, a nurse who lived just west of downtown. Denise had been documenting the changes in her neighborhood for the past 4 years with a drone and a blog. "I call it the slow drown," she said, showing Maya footage of her street gradually turning from asphalt to swamp. "It started with puddles. Then frogs showed up. Now I've got fish in my driveway when the tide's high." Denise pointed to her front porch, where sandbags sat like weary sentinels. "I stay because of my mom. And because moving means losing everything. We can't sell. No one's buying. We're stuck." Maya understood the helplessness in Denise's voice. In St. Pete, like so many coastal cities, climate collapse didn't arrive with a bang. It crept in like a slow fever, tolerable at first, then constant, then unbearable. Roads cracked and lifted as groundwater pressure increased. Saltwater corroded electrical systems. Foundations shifted. Businesses downtown installed floodgates, but the water still found a way in. The tipping point came in early October. A minor storm, one that wouldn't have made the news 5 years ago, pushed a surge into the bay that coincided with high tide. The result, over 20 inches of water in the streets within 2 hours. It wasn't a hurricane, it wasn't even a tropical storm, it was a routine rain paired with rising seas. But it shut the city down. Hospitals switched to emergency power. Shelters overflowed. Entire streets became impassable. Maya captured the moment a school bus stalled on 4th Street North, its wheels submerged, students climbing out through the emergency exit as parents screamed on the sidewalk. No one had been hurt, but the panic etched itself into the city's collective psyche. And yet, the city officials once again called it temporary, unusual, unpredictable. But Maya's sources told her otherwise. She interviewed a whistleblower from the municipal planning office who provided internal memos going back 3 years, showing that stormwater models had been quietly altered to make future projections seem less dire. They didn't want to scare off developers, he said. So they fudged the models. Reclassified areas. Told contractors what they wanted to hear. We all knew what was coming. But the truth doesn't sell condos. Maya sat with that line for hours. The truth doesn't sell condos. And now those condos were underwater, both literally and financially. Insurance companies had begun to pull out, declaring large sections of the city uninsurable by 2026. That announcement triggered a real estate crash. Property values plummeted. Foreclosures spiked. Families fled. But just like in Jacksonville and Tampa, those who couldn't afford to leave were left to carry the burden. Maya spent a week embedded with local volunteer groups who were converting vacant businesses into shelter spaces. She met a retired teacher who was now serving meals in a flooded cafe, and a teenager who had organized a solar-powered charging station using salvaged car batteries and spare panels from a hardware store. There was hope, even here. But it came with a weight. One evening, Maya sat on a rooftop with Logan, a marine biologist who had grown up in St. Pete and returned after college to study the changes in the bay. I used to swim there as a kid, he said, pointing toward the water, now tinged brown and green. Now we're seeing bacteria levels that make it dangerous just to wade. Fish kills. Algae blooms. Ecosystem collapse, in real time. And no one talks about it. It's like we're afraid that naming it makes it worse. Maya nodded. She understood that fear. But naming it was the only thing she could do. She spent her final night in St. Petersburg writing until dawn. Her piece, The City That Refused to Admit It Was Sinking, went live just as the morning sun rose over a waterlogged skyline. It was blunt, unapologetic, and infused with a deep sadness. She described the systemic failure, of leadership, of infrastructure, of imagination. She wrote about Denise, and Logan, and the bus full of kids wading through floodwater to reach safety. She wrote about the hidden cost of denial. Elon Musk shared the article within hours, posting, "We can build cities that float or we can watch cities drown. Choice is ours." The post ignited another storm of debate. Some claimed it was alarmism. Others called for immediate federal intervention. Congress scheduled emergency hearings. Maya didn't care about the politics. She cared about St. Pete. About the people still there, still fighting, still teaching and cooking and sandbagging and hoping. She walked the waterfront one last time before boarding her next flight. The murals were still there, faded but standing. On one wall, an artist had added a new line under an older painting of a beach sunrise. It read, "We are not gone. We are changing." Maya read it twice, then turned away, the words sitting with her like a weight and a promise. St. Petersburg was collapsing. But it wasn't defeated. Not yet. Orlando had long been the beating heart of Florida's tourism industry. Its skyline gleamed with the promise of magic and wonder, drawing millions to its theme parks, resorts, and attractions. But beneath the surface, the city was grappling with a crisis that no amount of pixie dust could conceal. In 2025, Orlando found itself at the crossroads of environmental decline and infrastructural failure. Maya Taylor arrived in the city during the height of summer, the air thick with humidity and the scent of impending rain. The streets buzzed with tourists and locals alike, but there was an underlying tension in the atmosphere. The recent spate of extreme weather events had left the city reeling, and the cracks in its facade were beginning to show. The first sign of trouble came when Maya visited one of Orlando's famed theme parks. What was once a pristine and meticulously maintained environment now bore the scars of neglect. Floodwaters had breached the park's perimeter, damaging rides and attractions. The staff, overwhelmed and underprepared, scrambled to mitigate the damage, but it was clear that the infrastructure was ill-equipped to handle the increasing frequency of such events. "We've never seen anything like this," said Karen, a longtime employee who had worked at the park for over 2 decades. "The flooding used to be a rare occurrence, but now it's happening every year. And each time, it's worse." Maya's next stop was the city's downtown area, where the effects of urban sprawl and poor planning were evident. Streets that were once bustling with activity were now eerily quiet, with many businesses shuttered due to repeated flooding and power outages. The city's aging infrastructure, designed for a population half its current size, was buckling under the strain. "It's like we're living in a sinking ship," remarked Carlos, a local shop owner. "The city keeps growing, but the infrastructure isn't keeping up. We're just waiting for the next disaster to hit." The tipping point came when a routine thunderstorm, typical for the region, turned catastrophic. Within hours, the city's stormwater systems were overwhelmed, leading to widespread flooding that paralyzed transportation and left thousands stranded. Emergency services were stretched thin, and the city's emergency response protocols, outdated and underfunded, faltered. "We were caught off guard," admitted Chief Ramirez of the Orlando Fire Department. "Our resources are limited, and the frequency of these events is outpacing our ability to respond." Maya spent the following days interviewing residents and city officials, uncovering a pattern of neglect and mismanagement. Budget allocations for infrastructure improvements had been repeatedly cut, with funds diverted to other projects or lost in bureaucratic red tape. The city's leadership, more focused on maintaining its image as a tourist destination, had failed to address the growing threats posed by climate change and urbanization. "We were warned," said Dr. Emily Tran, an urban planner who had been advocating for climate-resilient infrastructure for years. "But the political will was never there. Now, we're paying the price." As the city grappled with the immediate aftermath of the flooding, long-term solutions remained elusive. Proposals for comprehensive stormwater management systems and infrastructure upgrades were met with resistance, primarily due to the high costs and the city's reluctance to acknowledge the severity of the situation. "It's a tough pill to swallow," said Mayor Thompson. "But we have to face reality. Our city is changing, and we need to adapt." Maya's final report, Orlando, The Mirage of Resilience, painted a stark picture of a city in denial. It highlighted the disconnect between the city's image as a resilient tourist hub and the harsh realities faced by its residents. The piece resonated with readers nationwide, sparking debates about urban planning, climate change, and the responsibilities of city leadership. Elon Musk, known for his bold statements on urban sustainability, shared the article with the caption, "The future of cities isn't about magic, it's about resilience." The response was swift and intense. City officials, previously dismissive of the concerns, now found themselves under pressure to act. Emergency funds were allocated for immediate repairs, and discussions about long-term infrastructure planning gained momentum. However, many residents remained skeptical. "They'll fix the roads and put up new signs," said Carlos. "But until they address the root causes, it's just putting a band-aid on a bullet wound." Maya left Orlando with a sense of both hope and despair. The city had the resources and the potential to transform, but only if its leaders were willing to confront the uncomfortable truths and make the necessary changes. As she boarded her flight out of Orlando, she couldn't help but wonder how many other cities were living in their own mirages, waiting for the inevitable collapse to shatter their illusions. Naples had always been synonymous with affluence. The kind of place where wealth whispered instead of shouted, where luxury wasn't flaunted but assumed, where beachfront mansions stood like fortresses along the Gulf, seemingly immune to the chaos unraveling elsewhere in the state. It was the crown jewel of Southwest Florida, a city of gated communities, pristine golf courses, and manicured perfection. But beneath the curated calm, Naples was unraveling. And in 2025, the illusion of invincibility crumbled in full view. Maya Taylor drove into the city along US 41, past the opulent landscaping and whitewashed shopping districts, noting how little surface evidence there was of the environmental and infrastructural turmoil she knew existed. The sidewalks gleamed, the storefronts were lit, but when she pulled into a residential neighborhood barely 4 blocks from the coast, the real Naples emerged. Streets had been patched so many times they resembled mosaics. Storm drains gurgled with brackish water even on sunny days. Locals no longer bothered pretending this was temporary. They called it the new normal, said with a shrug, as if trying to convince themselves the water wouldn't rise again tomorrow. Maya met James and Annette Sullivan, retired schoolteachers who had moved to Naples 10 years earlier in pursuit of warmth and peace. They had bought a modest home a few miles inland, out of the flood zone, they thought. But after a year of unprecedented rainfall, increased tidal flow, and 2 back-to-back flood events in 2024, they realized those zone maps were outdated fantasies. "We thought we were safe," James said as he pointed to a water line on his garage door. "Now we just keep our valuables in plastic bins and hope the next one doesn't come before the insurance kicks in." But insurance wasn't kicking in anymore. That was part of the story too. Maya had uncovered a growing trend across the state where insurance companies were refusing to renew policies for entire zip codes deemed too risky. Naples was no exception. Wealthier homeowners could pay exorbitant rates for boutique coverage or self-insure, but average residents, even in Naples, were left exposed. The Sullivans had spent their life savings repairing flood damage twice in 12 months, and their policy had just been cancelled. "They didn't even call," Annette said quietly. "Just a letter in the mail. Sorry, we're out." Maya documented these stories, but she also went deeper, into the infrastructure that supported this delicate illusion of permanence. She spoke with civil engineers and planners, many of whom had tried, and failed, to sound alarms. One showed her a report filed in 2022 that warned the city's canal systems were at risk of breaching due to saltwater intrusion and soil erosion. Nothing had been done. Too expensive. Too disruptive to the tourism image. They thought if they built high enough and pretty enough, nature would forget them, the engineer said. But nature doesn't forget. It just waits. The real shock came not from a hurricane or storm, but from a silent, creeping disaster. In late August 2025, a massive freshwater aquifer beneath Collier County was contaminated by saltwater intrusion, a process sped up by overdevelopment and the draining of protective wetlands. Overnight, thousands of residents lost access to clean drinking water. Boil notices went out. Bottled water vanished from store shelves. The city scrambled, trucking in water from other parts of the state, but the damage was done. Wealthier communities imported private tankers and installed filtration systems. Everyone else lined up at FEMA stations. "You think you're safe because you're rich?" a volunteer said to Maya. "Try drinking your money. Let's see how far it gets you." The aquifer contamination made national headlines. Elon Musk shared Maya's initial write-up with a blunt message: "You can't engineer your way out of arrogance. Even the rich need water." The blow to Naples's reputation was immediate. Vacation cancellations soared. Property listings flooded the market. For the first time in decades, the city's population began to shrink. Maya toured once thriving beachfront neighborhoods where, "For sale," signs stood like tombstones. She passed by empty docks where yachts used to anchor. But beneath the loss of luxury was something more tragic: the unraveling of a community. Schools struggled to stay open as enrollment dipped. Local businesses laid off workers. Service employees, many of whom commuted in from surrounding towns, began leaving altogether. Without them, the city's invisible support system faltered. Trash piled up. Deliveries slowed. Even emergency services saw response times double. Maya spent a night at a local clinic, where she spoke with a nurse named Monica who described the new reality. "We're not a luxury town anymore," she said. "We're a disaster zone with palm trees." And yet, even in collapse, denial clung tight. Maya was invited to a private meeting with members of a local property investment group. They hoped to pitch a new, resilient luxury development, promising storm-proof homes and self-sustaining utilities. Maya listened politely as they described their plan to build a high-end, climate-resilient enclave, protected by levees and solar infrastructure. When she asked how they planned to maintain access roads if the surrounding neighborhoods flooded again, the lead investor shrugged. "That's not really our concern. Our buyers will have helicopters." Maya left that meeting shaken, not by the greed, but by the detachment. These people weren't planning to save Naples. They were planning to wall off the ruins and sell a curated slice of it to the highest bidder. She included that exchange in her article, Naples, The Cost of Elegance, and readers reacted with outrage. Not at the rich, but at the system that had allowed this to happen, that had prioritized aesthetics over sustainability, profits over preparation. Within days, protests formed in front of City Hall. Environmental groups demanded accountability. Lawsuits were filed. But as Maya knew by now, none of this came fast. Real change moved like mud, and the water didn't wait. She spent her last day in Naples standing on the edge of a flooded golf course, where wading birds had taken over fairways and algae bloomed where grass used to be. The sun was setting, casting golden light over the destruction, and for a moment, it looked beautiful. But it was the kind of beauty that came with silence, with stillness after the fall. Maya recorded her final thoughts before leaving. Naples built itself on elegance, on the belief that wealth could buy distance from risk. But the climate doesn't respect borders or bank accounts. It comes for everyone. And here, it came not with fury, but with quiet persistence. A slow drowning, 1 inch at a time. She sent the article and boarded a small charter heading east. Another city waited. Another truth needed telling. Naples was chapter 12. And the story was far from over. Cape Coral, Florida, was once the epitome of suburban ambition. Built on a sprawling canvas of canals and cul-de-sacs, it promised waterfront living for everyone. With over 400 miles of navigable canals, it was marketed as the Venice of America. But in 2025, this dream had turned into a nightmare. The city's infrastructure, designed for a population half its current size, was failing under the strain of rapid growth and climate change. Maya Taylor arrived in Cape Coral during the peak of the rainy season. The streets were eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the bustling communities she had encountered in other cities. As she drove through the neighborhoods, she noticed the telltale signs of neglect: cracked roads, overgrown lawns, and abandoned homes. The city's once pristine canals were now clogged with debris, and the water levels had risen dangerously close to the tops of the seawalls. Maya met with local residents who shared their concerns about the city's deteriorating condition. "We moved here for the canals," said Linda, a longtime resident. "But now, they're more of a liability than a luxury." Linda explained that the city's stormwater management system, which relied heavily on the canals, was no longer effective. The increasing frequency of heavy rainfalls had overwhelmed the system, leading to frequent flooding and property damage. "The city keeps building, but the infrastructure can't keep up," she added. Maya spoke with city officials who acknowledged the problem but seemed powerless to address it. "We're working on it," said Ryan Lamb, the city's emergency management director. "But the growth has been so rapid, and the funding just isn't there." Despite the city's efforts, the situation continued to worsen. In January 2024, a storm brought nearly a foot of rain to parts of Cape Coral, causing widespread flooding and infrastructure failures. The city requested $236,500 in emergency funds to repair aging pipes on Pine Island Lane and Southeast 16th Place. But these were just temporary fixes. The underlying issues remained unaddressed. Maya also learned that the city's water supply was under threat. Cape Coral relied on the Mid-Hawthorne Aquifer for its drinking water, but the aquifer's water levels had been declining due to overuse and prolonged drought. In response, the South Florida Water Management District had issued a severe water shortage warning for Lee County, which included Cape Coral. Residents in northeastern Cape Coral, who depended on private wells, were facing irrigation restrictions to conserve water. The city's rapid growth had outpaced its ability to provide essential services. New developments were being built without adequate infrastructure, leading to overburdened utilities and strained resources. "It's like building a house on sand," said Sean Pierce, a resident who had lived in Cape Coral for 3 years. "Eventually, it's going to collapse." The city's vulnerability to climate change was becoming increasingly apparent. Sea level rise and extreme weather events were exacerbating the existing problems. A study by the University of Florida found that Cape Coral had a medium to high vulnerability to sea level rise-induced coastal flooding, with both economically stable and low-income populations at risk. Despite these warnings, the city's leadership continued to prioritize development over resilience. "It's all about growth," said a local developer who wished to remain anonymous. "The city wants to keep the momentum going, but they're not thinking about the long-term consequences." Maya's investigation revealed a pattern of mismanagement and short-term thinking. The city's reliance on outdated infrastructure, coupled with its rapid expansion, had created a perfect storm of challenges. Residents were left to cope with the fallout. "We feel abandoned," said Linda. "The city sold us a dream, but now we're living in a disaster." Maya's article, Cape Coral, the water city drowning in its own design, highlighted the city's struggles and called for urgent action. The piece resonated with readers across the country, sparking discussions about urban planning, climate change, and the responsibilities of local governments. Elon Musk shared the article with a simple message: growth without foresight leads to collapse. The response was swift. City officials promised to review their development policies and invest in infrastructure improvements. However, many residents remained skeptical. "Talk is cheap," said Sean Pierce. "We've heard it all before." As Maya left Cape Coral, she couldn't help but wonder how many other cities were following the same path, prioritizing growth over sustainability, and ignoring the warnings until it was too late. Cape Coral's story was a cautionary tale, a reminder that unchecked development could lead to disaster. And as the climate crisis intensified, more cities would face similar challenges. The question was, would they learn from Cape Coral's mistakes, or would they be doomed to repeat them? Fort Myers, Florida, once a charming riverside town, had transformed into a bustling city teeming with tourists, retirees, and seasonal residents. Its historic downtown, lined with palm trees and boutique shops, exuded a laid-back charm that attracted visitors from all over the country. The Caloosahatchee River meandered through the heart of the city, offering picturesque views and recreational opportunities. But beneath the surface, Fort Myers was grappling with challenges that threatened its very existence. Maya Taylor arrived in the city during the peak of the rainy season. The air was thick with humidity, and dark clouds loomed overhead, threatening yet another downpour. As she drove through the city, she noticed the telltale signs of neglect: cracked roads, overgrown lawns, and abandoned homes. The city's once pristine canals were now clogged with debris, and the water levels had risen dangerously close to the tops of the seawalls. Maya met with local residents who shared their concerns about the city's deteriorating condition. "We moved here for the weather," said Linda, a longtime resident. "But now, it's just too hot and too wet." Linda explained that the city's infrastructure, designed for a population half its current size, was no longer adequate. The increasing frequency of heavy rainfalls had overwhelmed the stormwater system, leading to frequent flooding and property damage. "The city keeps building, but the infrastructure can't keep up," she added. Maya spoke with city officials who acknowledged the problem but seemed powerless to address it. "We're working on it," said Ryan Lamb, the city's emergency management director. "But the growth has been so rapid, and the funding just isn't there." Despite the city's efforts, the situation continued to worsen. In January 2024, a storm brought nearly a foot of rain to parts of Fort Myers, causing widespread flooding and infrastructure failures. The city requested $236,500 in emergency funds to repair aging pipes on Pine Island Lane and Southeast 16th Place. But these were just temporary fixes. The underlying issues remained unaddressed. Maya also learned that the city's water supply was under threat. Fort Myers relied on the Mid-Hawthorne Aquifer for its drinking water, but the aquifer's water levels have been declining due to overuse and prolonged drought. In response, the South Florida Water Management District had issued a severe water shortage warning for Lee County, which included Fort Myers. Residents in northeastern Fort Myers, who depended on private wells, were facing irrigation restrictions to conserve water. The city's rapid growth had outpaced its ability to provide essential services. New developments were being built without adequate infrastructure, leading to overburdened utilities and strained resources. "It's like building a house on sand," said Sean Pierce, a resident who had lived in Fort Myers for 3 years. "Eventually, it's going to collapse." The city's vulnerability to climate change was becoming increasingly apparent. Sea level rise and extreme weather events were exacerbating the existing problems. A study by the University of Florida found that Fort Myers had a medium to high vulnerability to sea level rise-induced coastal flooding, with both economically stable and low-income populations at risk. Despite these warnings, the city's leadership continued to prioritize development over resilience. "It's all about growth," said a local developer who wished to remain anonymous. "The city wants to keep the momentum going, but they're not thinking about the long-term consequences." Maya's investigation revealed a pattern of mismanagement and short-term thinking. The city's reliance on outdated infrastructure, coupled with its rapid expansion, had created a perfect storm of challenges. Residents were left to cope with the fallout. "We feel abandoned," said Linda. "The city sold us a dream, but now we're living in a disaster." Maya's article, Fort Myers, the city that couldn't weather the storm, highlighted the city's struggles and called for urgent action. The piece resonated with readers across the country, sparking discussions about urban planning, climate change, and the responsibilities of local governments. Elon Musk shared the article with a simple message: growth without foresight leads to collapse. The response was swift. City officials promised to review their development policies and invest in infrastructure improvements. However, many residents remained skeptical. "Talk is cheap," said Sean Pierce. "We've heard it all before." As Maya left Fort Myers, she couldn't help but wonder how many other cities were following the same path, prioritizing growth over sustainability, and ignoring the warnings until it was too late. Fort Myers' story was a cautionary tale, a reminder that unchecked development could lead to disaster. And as the climate crisis intensified, more cities would face similar challenges. The question was, would they learn from Fort Myers' mistakes, or would they be doomed to repeat them? St. Petersburg, or the Sunshine City, had long been a jewel of Florida's west coast, renowned for its vibrant art scene, historic architecture, and stunning waterfront parks. With a population swelling over 265,000, it was a bustling hub where retirees mingled with young professionals, artists found inspiration, and tourists flocked to the endless beaches and cultural festivals. Yet, behind the postcard-perfect images, St. Petersburg was quietly enduring a crisis that threatened to dim its bright reputation. Maya Taylor arrived during early spring of 2025, a season that once brought renewal now tainted with an uneasy stillness. The normally lively downtown street seemed subdued, punctuated by shuttered shops and "for lease" signs. Locals whispered of an invisible enemy. A creeping flood that no levee could hold back and an economy struggling to stay afloat. She met Alex Carter, a lifelong resident and local business owner who ran a small cafe near the waterfront. "I've watched this city grow for decades," he told Maya as they sipped coffee overlooking Tampa Bay. "But lately, it feels like we're watching it slip away." Alex described how rising sea levels and worsening storms had caused frequent flooding in low-lying neighborhoods like Old Northeast and Snell Isle, areas once prized for their historic homes and walkability. Streets turned to rivers during even moderate rains, forcing residents to sandbag doorways and carry supplies over soggy sidewalks. "Insurance rates have skyrocketed, and some policies just aren't being renewed anymore," he said, shaking his head. "People are leaving because they can't afford the risk, and that's killing local business." Maya's reporting revealed that St. Petersburg's infrastructure was buckling under pressure. The city's stormwater management system, built decades ago when the population was half its current size, was overwhelmed. Many drainage pumps were aging and prone to failure during storms, and repeated flooding caused saltwater intrusion that corroded pipes and contaminated groundwater supplies. The city had attempted to invest in upgrades but was hamstrung by budget constraints and political gridlock. Environmental experts Maya interviewed warned that the Tampa Bay area, including St. Petersburg, faced some of the highest projected rates of sea level rise in the U.S. Over the next 30 years, projections showed up to 2.5 feet of increase, enough to permanently flood large portions of the city's coastal zone. The social consequences were equally dire. Long-time residents, especially elderly and low-income populations, were disproportionately affected. Displacement increased as affordable housing stock was damaged or lost, forcing many into temporary shelters or to relocate altogether. Community groups formed grassroots efforts to assist vulnerable neighbors, but these could only do so much. Maya met Maria Lopez, a nurse and mother of 3, who had lived in the same neighborhood for 40 years. "I'm scared for my kids," she said. "The water comes closer every year, and I don't know if we'll have a home to come back to after the next storm." Beyond flooding, the economic impacts rippled through the city. Tourism, a major pillar of St. Petersburg's economy, declined sharply as travelers opted for safer destinations. Art festivals saw record cancellations, and hospitality workers faced layoffs. Local government struggled to balance repair costs with maintaining essential services. Maya attended a city council meeting where debates grew heated over how to fund resilience projects. Proposals for raising taxes or redirecting funds were met with resistance, revealing deep divisions among stakeholders. Some argued that adaptation was necessary to preserve the city's future, while others insisted economic growth must come first. Into this fractured landscape arrived an announcement that shocked residents. A major developer planned to build a luxury waterfront complex, complete with high-end condos, shopping, and marina facilities, right in one of the most flood-prone districts. The project promised jobs and investment but also symbolized the city's conflicting priorities. Maya interviewed the developer, who claimed their design incorporated cutting-edge flood mitigation technology. Yet community activists remained skeptical, fearing the project would accelerate gentrification and displace longtime residents. "It's like building a castle on quicksand," said Diane Matthews, a local organizer. "We need solutions that protect everyone, not just the wealthy few." Maya's article, titled "St. Petersburg, When Sunshine City Faces Its Darkest Days," laid bare the contradictions and challenges facing the city. She traced the complex web of climate threats, economic strain, and social inequity that threatened to unravel the fabric of the community. Elon Musk shared the piece, commenting, "A city's true strength is in its ability to adapt and protect its people, not just its profits." The article sparked a statewide conversation, drawing attention from policymakers, environmental groups, and citizens alike. Some local officials pledged to accelerate resilience planning and seek federal funding. Yet many residents remained uncertain, torn between hope for change and frustration with past failures. As Maya walked the waterfront at sunset, she reflected on the city's history. St. Petersburg had endured hardships before, from hurricanes to economic downturns, and had always found a way to reinvent itself. But the threats of 2025 felt different, persistent, systemic, and driven by forces far beyond any single storm. She recorded her final thoughts. "St. Petersburg's story is a warning and a challenge. It reminds us that the brightest lights can flicker when we ignore the rising tides. But it also reminds us that communities with heart and resilience can still find a way forward, if they act before it's too late." With the sun dipping below the horizon and the city lights beginning to flicker on, Maya knew her work in St. Petersburg was just one chapter in a much larger story about Florida's future, and perhaps the world's. The next chapter awaited. Miami, a city known worldwide for its sun-soaked beaches, neon nightlife, and vibrant cultural melting pot, was at a crossroads in 2025. The glamorous image of Miami as a tropical paradise belied a harsh reality: it was one of the most vulnerable cities in the nation to the devastating effects of climate change. Rising sea levels, intensifying hurricanes, and economic inequality were converging to challenge Miami's very survival. Maya Taylor arrived in Miami during the sultry spring months, when the heat seemed to press down like a physical weight. Driving through the sprawling metropolis, she saw gleaming skyscrapers rising alongside struggling neighborhoods. The stark contrast told a story of a city deeply divided, with resilience and risk unevenly distributed. Miami's vulnerability to sea level rise was not new news. Scientists had long warned that Miami's porous limestone foundation made traditional flood barriers ineffective, allowing saltwater to seep into the water table and infrastructure. By 2025, king tides caused regular, sunny-day flooding that turned streets into shallow canals. Miami Beach, the iconic barrier island lined with Art Deco hotels and luxury condos, was sinking faster than anticipated. The city had invested heavily in pumps and raised roads, but the sheer scale of the problem overwhelmed efforts. Residents in lower-income neighborhoods like Little Haiti and Overtown faced the harshest consequences. Many lived in aging buildings with inadequate flood protection, and lacked the resources to relocate or retrofit their homes. "We're the first to get flooded and the last to get help," said Jasmine Rodriguez, a community organizer who worked tirelessly to assist vulnerable residents. Meanwhile, downtown Miami and wealthy enclaves like Coral Gables were racing to build seawalls, elevate streets, and develop futuristic flood defenses. This disparity sparked tension and accusations of environmental injustice. Maya met with Dr. Carlos Ramirez, a climatologist at the University of Miami, who explained the city's unique geological and environmental challenges. Miami's problem isn't just the sea rising, it's the ground sinking and the saltwater creeping underground, he said. Traditional solutions like levees won't work long-term. We need innovative, multi-layered approaches. Economic strain compounded the environmental crisis. Miami's economy, heavily reliant on tourism, real estate, and international finance, was faltering as climate risks scared off investors and visitors. The pandemic's aftershocks were still felt, and the ongoing environmental threats added new uncertainty. Businesses closed or relocated, and unemployment rose in already vulnerable communities. Maya interviewed Luis Martinez, a small business owner whose family had run a restaurant in Little Havana for generations. "Our customers have disappeared," he lamented. "Flooding scares tourists away, and rents keep going up. It feels like we're being pushed out." The city's political landscape was fraught with debate. Some leaders advocated aggressive infrastructure spending and rezoning to accommodate retreat from the most vulnerable areas. Others resisted, fearing economic disruption and loss of property values. The tensions came to a head during a contentious city commission meeting where residents clashed over a proposal to buy out flood-prone properties in Overtown and convert them to green space. Activists warned that without careful planning, such moves could deepen displacement and inequality. Maya also explored the psychological toll on Miami's residents. The constant threat of hurricanes, floods, and forced relocations created stress and uncertainty. Families debated whether to stay or leave, and children grew up in a city where the next big storm was always looming. Maya spoke with Sophia Nguyen, a high school student preparing for college. "I love Miami, but I'm scared about what the future holds," she said. "Sometimes it feels like the city is slipping away beneath our feet." Elon Musk, who had previously tweeted warnings about Florida's coastal cities, visited Miami in early 2025. He met with local officials and scientists, advocating for ambitious climate adaptation projects and innovative technologies, including underground water barriers and renewable energy infrastructure. Musk's presence galvanized media attention and renewed public interest, but also sparked skepticism. "It's great to have ideas," said City Commissioner Angela Perez, "but we need funding, community buy-in, and practical steps, not just hype." Maya's article, Miami, The Battle of the Rising Tide and the Divided City, captured the city's complex struggles. It highlighted the intersecting challenges of climate vulnerability, economic disparity, and political division. Her reporting underscored the urgent need for inclusive, forward-thinking policies that prioritize the most vulnerable residents. The article resonated nationally, sparking debates about urban resilience, social justice, and the future of coastal cities. As Maya toured Miami's neighborhoods one last time before leaving, she reflected on the city's resilience and fragility. Miami was a city of contrasts, hope and despair, beauty and vulnerability, wealth and poverty. Its fate hinged not only on environmental forces but on political will and social equity. Would Miami rise to the challenge and reinvent itself as a model for climate adaptation? Or would the rising tide wash away the dreams of its diverse communities? As the sun set over Biscayne Bay, casting long shadows over the city skyline, Maya knew the story was far from over. Miami's battle was emblematic of a global struggle, one that would define the decades to come. The clock was ticking, and the world was watching. Jacksonville, Florida's largest city by land area and population, was once hailed as a beacon of growth and opportunity. Its sprawling suburbs, growing ports, and diverse economy promised a bright future. But by 2025, the city was grappling with mounting environmental and economic challenges that threatened to undermine decades of progress. Maya Taylor arrived in Jacksonville in the late summer, when the heat was relentless and the humidity clung like a second skin. Driving along the St. Johns River, she noticed both signs of prosperity, new developments, bustling shopping centers, and signs of strain, eroded riverbanks, dilapidated neighborhoods, and traffic snarls that spoke to inadequate infrastructure. Jacksonville's rapid growth had come at a cost. The city's population had surged past 900,000, but public services and infrastructure had not kept pace. Flooding was an increasing problem, especially in areas near the river and low-lying coastal zones. Hurricane Ian's devastating impact the previous year had exposed vulnerabilities in the city's emergency preparedness and infrastructure resilience. Residents in the West Side and Arlington neighborhoods recounted harrowing experiences of floodwaters invading homes and streets, often without adequate warning or assistance. Maya met with community leader Marcus Brown, who had coordinated relief efforts after Ian. "We came together to help each other, but the city's response was slow," Marcus told her. "We can't keep relying on volunteers to fill the gaps." The city's economy was a mixed bag. While sectors like logistics, finance, and healthcare thrived, economic inequality widened. Many neighborhoods suffered from disinvestment, high unemployment, and deteriorating public services. Maya visited the Riverside area, once a vibrant arts and culture hub, now struggling with vacant storefronts and rising crime rates. "People want to move here, but only if the city can offer safety and opportunity," said local business owner Anita Patel. Environmental issues compounded the social and economic strains. Jacksonville's sprawling footprint put pressure on wetlands and natural habitats critical for flood mitigation. Development encroached on marshes that had long served as natural buffers against storms and rising tides. The city faced increasing threats from sea level rise, storm surge, and inland flooding. Maya interviewed Dr. Emily Chen, an environmental scientist at the University of North Florida, who warned that the city's current trajectory was unsustainable. Without coordinated planning that balances growth and conservation, Jacksonville risks severe environmental degradation and increased flood risks, she said. The city government recognized the challenges but struggled with political divisions and budget constraints. Efforts to implement comprehensive climate adaptation plans were slowed by disagreements over zoning, funding, and priorities. Some officials prioritized economic development over environmental protection, while advocacy groups pushed for more sustainable policies. The tension was palpable during a public hearing Maya attended about a proposed waterfront redevelopment project in downtown Jacksonville. Proponents touted job creation and economic revitalization, opponents feared displacement of longtime residents and increased vulnerability to flooding. "We can't build our way out of this crisis without thinking about who gets left behind," activist Tanya Williams told the crowd. Maya also explored the human side of Jacksonville's challenges. Families faced difficult decisions about whether to stay in flood-prone neighborhoods or seek safer ground elsewhere. Renters and homeowners alike worried about rising insurance premiums and property values dropping due to climate risks. At a local shelter, Maya met Carlos Hernandez, a father of two who had lost his home to flooding last year. "We're caught between a rock and a hard place," Carlos said. "We want to stay, but the floods keep coming." Elon Musk, whose warnings about Florida's coastal cities have become widely known, mentioned Jacksonville in a recent interview. He noted the city's strategic importance as a port and logistics hub but warned that without urgent adaptation measures, its economic future could be in jeopardy. Growth must be sustainable, he emphasized. Ignoring environmental risks is a recipe for collapse. Maya's article, Jacksonville, Growth at a Cost, a City on the Edge, delved deep into the intertwined challenges facing the city. She highlighted the need for coordinated action across government, business, and communities to address infrastructure deficits, environmental threats, and social inequality. The article sparked conversations among local leaders and residents, but the path forward remained uncertain. As Maya left Jacksonville, she reflected on the city's paradox, a place of promise and peril, where opportunity and risk coexisted. Jacksonville's story was emblematic of many fast-growing cities facing the realities of climate change and economic disparity. The question remained whether its leaders and citizens could come together to forge a resilient and equitable future before the mounting pressures became overwhelming. The next chapter would take Maya to Tampa, where a similar battle was unfolding between economic ambitions and environmental limits, a battle that might decide the fate of the region itself. Tampa, Florida's vibrant gateway on the Gulf Coast, was once celebrated as a city of opportunity, growth, and sunshine. With a population nearing 400,000, Tampa had evolved into a bustling metro area where innovation and tourism thrived. Yet, by 2025, the city was grappling with mounting pressures from rapid development, environmental threats, and social inequality that threatened to unravel its future. Maya Taylor arrived in Tampa during a late spring afternoon, when dark storm clouds loomed over the skyline, a stark reminder of the ever-present threat of hurricanes and flooding. As she drove along the Hillsborough River, she noted the stark contrasts, gleaming new office towers and luxury condos juxtaposed against neighborhoods struggling with poverty and infrastructure decay. Tampa's economic boom had been fueled by a surge in real estate development, tech startups, and port activity. However, this growth masked underlying vulnerabilities. The city's low-lying coastal geography made it especially susceptible to rising sea levels and storm surges. Recent years had seen an uptick in sunny day flooding, when tides overtopped seawalls and inundated streets even without rain. Neighborhoods such as Ybor City and West Tampa, historically working class and culturally rich, bore the brunt of these floods. Maya met Carlos Rivera, a lifelong resident and community organizer in West Tampa. "We've been dealing with flooding for years," Carlos explained, "but it's getting worse. Some families have lost everything, and the city's response feels slow and inadequate. Infrastructure challenges compounded the environmental risks. Tampa's aging stormwater management system was designed decades ago when the population was much smaller. Pumps and drainage canals struggled to cope with heavier rains and higher tides. Saltwater intrusion threatened freshwater supplies and damaged underground pipes. City officials acknowledged these problems but faced tough decisions about where to invest limited funds. Maya attended a city council meeting where a heated debate unfolded over a proposed bond measure to fund resilience projects. Business leaders pushed for rapid development and modernization, emphasizing economic growth. Meanwhile, environmental advocates and neighborhood groups demanded investment in flood mitigation, affordable housing, and equitable planning. The divide underscored Tampa's complex dynamics. Economic growth was essential, but so was protecting vulnerable communities from environmental harm. The debate echoed statewide challenges, where booming cities wrestled with balancing prosperity and sustainability. Maya's reporting also highlighted the human toll. Families in flood-prone areas faced repeated evacuations and rising insurance costs. Some homeowners sold their properties at steep losses, while renters struggled with displacement as landlords raised rents to cover flood damage repairs. At a local shelter, Maya spoke with Tara Johnson, a single mother who had been displaced twice in the past year due to flooding. "I just want a safe place for my kids," she said, tears in her eyes. "But it feels like we're always moving, always trying to catch up with the water." Tampa's tourism industry, vital to the local economy, showed signs of strain. Beachfront hotels and attractions reported cancellations linked to weather concerns and media reports about climate risks. The city's iconic Gasparilla Festival, a cherished tradition, faced logistical challenges as rising tides threatened parade routes and event spaces. Environmental experts Maya consulted painted a sobering picture. Dr. Helen Kim, a coastal ecologist, warned that Tampa Bay's ecosystems were under stress from urbanization and climate change. "Healthy wetlands and mangroves are crucial buffers against storms," she explained. "But development has destroyed much of this natural protection, leaving the city more exposed." The city had launched initiatives to restore wetlands and improve green infrastructure, but progress was slow and funding uncertain. Maya's article, Tampa, Between Boom and Breakdown, captured the city's precarious position. It explored the tensions between growth and resilience, wealth and vulnerability, hope and fear. The piece emphasized the urgent need for integrated planning that prioritized both economic vitality and environmental sustainability. Elon Musk, following Tampa's story closely, tweeted, "Tampa is at a critical juncture. Smart investments in infrastructure and green technology can save this city, but time is running out." His endorsement drew national attention and sparked discussions about innovative solutions, from seawalls to renewable energy-powered pumps and resilient urban design. As Maya walked along Tampa's waterfront one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, she pondered the city's future. Tampa was a city of contradictions and complexities, caught between its booming economy and the harsh realities of climate change. Could its leaders and residents find a way to navigate these challenges and build a resilient, inclusive future? The story of Tampa was far from over. It was a story of hope, tension, and transformation, a microcosm of Florida's broader struggle. As night fell and city lights twinkled along the bay, Maya knew that the next chapter awaited, taking her to another city where the battle against collapse was just beginning. Fort Lauderdale, often dubbed the Venice of America for its extensive canal system and sun-drenched beaches, had long been a symbol of Florida's coastal allure. But by 2025, this glamorous city was under growing pressure from the same forces threatening much of the state: rising seas, aging infrastructure, and the social challenges of rapid change. Maya Taylor arrived in Fort Lauderdale during a humid early summer morning. The salty ocean breeze mixed with the scent of blooming tropical flowers as she drove through neighborhoods where sleek yachts lined marinas and historic Art Deco buildings stood alongside modern high-rises. Yet beneath the surface, Fort Lauderdale was grappling with a difficult reality. Sea level rise was steadily creeping into the city's streets. King tides regularly flooded low-lying areas, stranding cars and flooding businesses. The city's extensive canal system, once a draw for tourists and residents alike, had become a double-edged sword, offering beauty and recreation but also pathways for saltwater intrusion and floodwaters. Maya met with Alicia Hernandez, a longtime resident and environmental advocate who had witnessed the city's transformation firsthand. "We love this place," Alicia said, "but the water is coming closer every year. We're fighting to protect our homes and our community." Fort Lauderdale's economy, reliant on tourism, real estate, and boating, faced mounting uncertainty. Visitors were increasingly wary of the flooding and storm threats, and the rising cost of insurance and maintenance was squeezing local businesses. The once thriving downtown area showed signs of strain, with some shops shuttered and new development slowed. City officials acknowledged these challenges and had launched a series of initiatives aimed at enhancing resilience. Investments in stormwater management, elevated roadways, and seawalls were underway, alongside efforts to restore wetlands and improve green spaces. Yet funding constraints and competing priorities made progress uneven. Maya attended a town hall meeting where residents voiced frustration and fear. Some advocated for aggressive buyouts of flood-prone properties, while others argued that such moves would displace vulnerable communities and erode the city's character. The debate reflected a broader struggle to balance environmental necessity with social equity. Maya also explored the psychological impact of living in a city under siege from climate change. Residents described a mix of attachment and anxiety, pride and uncertainty. Families debated whether to stay and fight or to leave behind the place they loved. At a local school, Maya spoke with high school student Marcus Lee, who worried about his city's future but remained hopeful. "We've been through storms before," he said. "I believe we can find a way to keep Fort Lauderdale strong." Elon Musk, in his ongoing commentary on Florida's climate challenges, highlighted Fort Lauderdale's situation as emblematic of the state's coastal cities. "Innovation and community action must go hand in hand," he tweeted. Fort Lauderdale's future depends on both. Maya's article, Fort Lauderdale, Paradise Under Pressure, painted a vivid picture of a city caught between its glamorous image and the harsh realities of environmental change. She underscored the urgent need for inclusive planning, sustainable development, and community engagement. The piece resonated with readers statewide and sparked conversations about the broader implications for Florida's coastline. As Maya walked along Fort Lauderdale's beach promenade at sunset, watching the waves lap gently against the shore, she felt the weight of the city's struggle. Fort Lauderdale was a city of beauty and resilience, but also vulnerability and complexity. Its story was a poignant chapter in the larger narrative of Florida's fight to survive and adapt in a changing world. The final chapter awaited, taking Maya to the last city on her list, West Palm Beach, where the intersection of affluence, activism, and environmental urgency created both challenges and hope. West Palm Beach, Florida, known for its upscale neighborhoods, luxury boutiques, and vibrant art scene, had long been a jewel of the Sunshine State. But as Maya Taylor discovered during her 2025 visit, beneath the city's polished exterior lay a complex struggle, a microcosm of Florida's broader battle against climate change, social inequity, and uncertain futures. Arriving in West Palm Beach on a bright spring morning, Maya was struck by the city's beauty, palm-lined streets, crystal-clear waters of the Intracoastal Waterway, and the bustling downtown district filled with cafes and galleries. But the shadows cast by looming challenges quickly became apparent. The city's wealth was both a strength and a source of tension. Upscale developments perched precariously close to the water, with multimillion-dollar homes at risk from rising seas and increasingly frequent flooding. Meanwhile, lower-income neighborhoods farther inland grappled with infrastructure neglect and limited resources to cope with environmental threats. Maya's first stop was the historic Northwest District, where longtime resident Jerome Thompson shared his concerns. "We're part of the city too, but sometimes it feels like we're forgotten," Jerome said. "Flooding hits us hard, but there's little investment in fixing our streets or protecting our homes." In contrast, in the affluent Palm Beach Gardens area, homeowners had access to cutting-edge flood defenses, seawalls, and private emergency services. This stark disparity fueled debates about environmental justice and equitable resilience planning. Maya attended a city council meeting focused on West Palm Beach's ambitious climate adaptation strategy. The plan included raising streets, upgrading stormwater systems, expanding green spaces, and incentivizing sustainable building practices. While many praised the vision, some residents voiced concerns about costs, displacement, and whether the plan would truly protect vulnerable communities. Among the advocates pushing for bold action was Dr. Lisa Nguyen, an environmental scientist and native of West Palm Beach. "We have the resources to lead by example," she told the council. "But we must ensure no one is left behind." The city's economy, buoyed by tourism, finance, and real estate, faced new pressures as climate risks began influencing investment decisions. Insurance premiums soared, and some developers reconsidered projects in high-risk zones. Yet West Palm Beach's affluence also enabled innovation. The city had begun exploring renewable energy integration, smart infrastructure, and partnerships with technology firms to enhance resilience. Maya's interviews with residents captured the emotional complexity of living in a city on the front lines. Some, like luxury hotel manager Olivia Martinez, expressed optimism about the city's future and the power of human ingenuity. Others, like Jerome, worried that the pace of change was too slow and the burden too unevenly shared. Elon Musk, who had repeatedly highlighted Florida's coastal vulnerabilities, praised West Palm Beach's proactive stance in a recent interview. "This city has the opportunity to set a new standard for climate resilience," he said. "But leadership and community engagement will be key." Maya's article, West Palm Beach, Wealth, Will, and the Fight for the Future, wove together stories of hope, challenge, and determination. It emphasized that the city's fate would depend not only on wealth or technology but on inclusive decision-making and shared commitment. As Maya walked along Clematis Street at dusk, the glow of streetlights reflecting off the water, she reflected on the city's journey. West Palm Beach embodied Florida's contradictions and aspirations, a place of beauty and vulnerability, division and unity, peril and potential. The story she had traveled across the state to tell was one of resilience and reckoning. 10 cities facing collapse, yes, but also 10 communities with the power to choose their futures. As she prepared to close her notebook, Maya thought back to the question that had sparked her journey: what if you suddenly lost everything and had no one by your side? In Florida's cities, the answer was still unfolding. But one thing was clear: amid uncertainty and challenge, love, for family, for home, for community, would always lead the way. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?